a clandestine subterranean Soviet research facility buried deep behind the Iron Curtain, shielded from the eyes of the West, the oversight of the international community, and the fundamental morality of modern science. According to a legend that has terrified the internet, spawned countless short films, and kept millions awake at night, 5 political prisoners, declared enemies of the state, were offered a dark Faustian bargain. They were sealed inside a hermetic, reinforced gas chamber. The objective? To test a revolutionary experimental airborne stimulant known as Nikolaev gas. The promise? Survive 30 consecutive days without closing your eyes, without succumbing to the biological imperative of sleep, and you earn your freedom. A total pardon. The story goes that for the first 5 days, the experiment proceeded smoothly. The prisoners talked to each other. They whispered their deepest traumas into the hidden microphones, and they read from the provided library. But the gas was changing them. It was eroding the fundamental architecture of their minds. By day 9, the screaming began. One captive ran back and forth across the chamber for 3 hours straight, tearing his vocal cords until he could only produce a horrifying, silent squeak. By day 15, the researchers, terrified by the sudden, dead silence that had fallen over the chamber, broke protocol. They purged the stimulant gas, replaced it with fresh oxygen, and opened the heavy steel doors. What they found inside has become a cornerstone of modern digital horror. The subjects had violently, systematically mutilated themselves. They had torn their own flesh, removed their own abdominal organs, and consumed parts of their own bodies. When the armed soldiers tried to extract them, the subjects fought with superhuman, desperate strength, begging, screaming for the gas to be turned back on. They claimed they had touched something profound in the darkness. "We must remain awake," they pleaded. It is a visceral, terrifying narrative of science stripped of its ethics, a Frankenstein story tailor-made for the digital age. But here is the objective, historical truth, and it is a truth that is far more unsettling than any internet creepypasta. The Russian sleep experiment never happened. It was a piece of online fiction, written anonymously for a web forum contest in 2010. Yet the reason this story infected the global consciousness so deeply, the reason it feels so viscerally real to anyone who reads it, is because it taps into a profound, undeniable biological terror. We spend 1/3 of our lives completely unconscious, paralyzed, and entirely vulnerable. And the real, documented science of what happens when you forcefully strip that sanctuary away from the human brain is a horror story written not in fiction, but in cold, clinical data. The battle, the war against the clock. To understand the actual physical limits of human endurance, we don't need mythical Soviet gas chambers. We just need to look at the dark chapters of medical history and the physiological reality of the human nervous system. The true battle against sleep isn't fought with flesh-tearing violence. It is fought with a slow, agonizing, systemic cognitive collapse. For decades, intelligence agencies around the world, most notably the CIA during the infamous, highly classified MKUltra project in the 1950s and 60s, experimented heavily with sleep deprivation. They didn't do this to create super soldiers who could fight indefinitely. They did it because they quickly realized that denying sleep is one of the fastest, most effective ways to entirely break a human being's grip on reality. It induces a state of artificial psychosis, rendering a subject entirely pliable. But the most famous scientifically monitored battle against the clock happened entirely in the public eye in 1964. A 17-year-old high school student named Randy Gardner set the scientifically documented record for intentional sleep deprivation, 264 hours, or exactly 11 straight days. He wasn't in a military bunker. He was doing a science fair project in San Diego, monitored by prominent sleep researchers from Stanford University, including Dr. William Dement. The degradation of Gardner's mind over those 11 days was systematic, predictable, and deeply terrifying to witness. By day 2, his eyes struggled to focus. He lost the ability to identify objects by touch alone. By day 3, Gardner lost the ability to repeat simple tongue twisters. His mood swung violently. He became uncoordinated, deeply irritable, and suspicious of his friends. By day 4, the hallucinations began. He believed a common street sign was a person standing in the dark. He became absolutely convinced he was a famous running back playing in the Rose Bowl, rather than a teenager in a living room. Why does this happen so quickly? When we sleep, specifically during the deep and REM sleep cycles, the brain activates something called the glymphatic system. Think of it as a high-pressure power wash for your neurons. It flushes out toxic metabolic byproducts, specifically a protein called amyloid beta that builds up naturally during your waking hours. When you refuse to sleep, these neurotoxins accumulate rapidly. The brain, effectively drowning in its own chemical waste, begins to heavily misfire. The synapses fail to connect. By day 6, Gardner lost the ability to form short-term memories. Researchers asked him to do a simple cognitive test, subtract 7 from 100 repeatedly. He got to 65 and then just stopped speaking. When asked why he stopped, he looked around blankly and said he had literally forgotten what he was doing. To protect itself from total catastrophic failure, the brain initiates a defense mechanism known as microsleeps. These are brief, uncontrollable moments, lasting anywhere from a fraction of a second to 30 seconds, where sections of the brain shut down entirely while your eyes remain wide open. You are technically awake, standing upright, but neurologically, you are slipping into a localized, temporary coma. You are a ghost piloting a failing machine, unaware that you are slipping out of existence for seconds at a time. AD break. Speaking of drifting into different states of mind, setting the perfect psychological atmosphere for a documentary like this is crucial. You need audio that conveys the creeping paranoia of sleep deprivation, the subtle ticking of a clock, a low, unsettling bass drone, or the sudden, sharp sting of a horror string section. That's where epidemic sound comes in. Consider it your secure lab for production assets. A massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No copyright claims, no legal headaches. Just reliable access to thousands of tracks, from tense, atmospheric soundscapes to the precise sound design you need. A heartbeat slowing down, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, or the echoing drip of a cold bunker. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to access the library. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this deep dive into the human mind. Now, back to the absolute limits of our endurance, the decisive stroke. The lethal limit. While Randy Gardner miraculously survived his 11-day ordeal without apparent long-term physical damage, recovering his cognitive functions after a marathon 14-hour slumber, he is the exception, not the rule. The human body has a hard-coded fatal limit, and we know exactly what it looks like because of a tragic, extremely rare genetic anomaly known as fatal familial insomnia, or FFI. For those afflicted with this terrifying hereditary prion disease, a mutated protein builds up and physically destroys the thalamus, the deep ancient brain structure that acts as the primary switchboard for sleep and sensory regulation. The patient simply loses the physiological ability to cross the threshold into unconsciousness. They cannot sleep ever again. No amount of sedatives, barbiturates, or exhaustion can force their brain to shut down. The clinical progression of FFI reveals the true absolute limit of human endurance, and the statistics are uncompromisingly grim: 100% mortality. There is no cure, and there are no survivors. Over the course of 12 to 18 agonizing months, the patient experiences severe panic attacks, overwhelming paranoia, and rapid unexplained weight loss. Without the restorative power of sleep, the cardiovascular system is forced to operate under a state of permanent crushing strain. Blood pressure skyrockets. The immune system plummets to near zero, leaving the body entirely defenseless against the most basic bacterial infections. Eventually, the patient descends into a state of total waking dementia before their internal organs simply shut down from the sheer, unending metabolic stress of being permanently awake. We see this exact physiological collapse mirrored in strictly controlled laboratory environments. In the 1980s, researcher Alan Rechtschaffen conducted groundbreaking experiments at the University of Chicago, where rats were kept completely awake on a rotating disc. They didn't die from the psychological stress or from madness. They died within 2 to 3 weeks because their bodies literally forgot how to regulate internal temperature and metabolism. They consumed massive amounts of food but withered away, their biology collapsing entirely under the unbearable weight of perpetual wakefulness. The revelation. So what is the true revelation of the Russian sleep experiment? Why does a fake internet story from 2010 hold such an unshakable power over our collective imagination? It isn't about the cruelty of hypothetical Soviet scientists or the fear of a secret government-engineered gas. It is about our deep, instinctive, evolutionary fear of our own fragile biology. The real horror isn't that sleep deprivation turns us into violent, flesh-eating monsters. The true horror is much quieter and fundamentally much sadder. It turns us into nothing at all. It systematically strips away our memory, our personality, our identity, our grip on reality, and eventually the very autonomic biological functions that keep our hearts beating and our lungs expanding. We are entirely tethered to the void of sleep. We must surrender to the darkness, relinquish all our control, and become entirely helpless for 8 hours every single day, just to survive the next. The myth of the Russian sleep experiment survives because it exaggerates a profound biological truth we all feel in our bones. Cross the threshold of exhaustion, deny the body its mandated rest, and the mind truly does begin to fracture, leaving only an empty shell behind.